Hello everybody, it's Mrs. Pound and I'm back with another video from chapter 1.2 about cells. So today's topic is going to be from section 125 about cell transport. Our objectives are going to be to describe the processes of diffusion and osmosis and to summarize how cells depend on diffusion and osmosis and determine why cells must be small in order to sustain life. So what I want to talk about first is passive transport. So things are moving around in a cell, they're moving in and out of a cell. There's a lot of transport of materials going on. And one way that this happens is there's movement of materials that requires no energy from the cell, which is a bonus, right? If it does not require energy. So the first two types of transport I'm going to describe are passive transport, require no energy from the cell. The first is diffusion. This is the movement of particles from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. And that's why I have this background here where the color is really concentrated. It's going to spread out. This is like color in water. And where it's concentrated, it's going to spread out from where it's concentrated to fill up the whole beaker. And it's going to distribute itself so it's evenly colored after a while. You will not see these splotches of orange and red. It will mix so that it's an intermediate color. This is passive transport, requires no energy. It's used to move substances inside of the cell. So diffusion occurs inside of a cell with some substances like oxygen, water, and carbon dioxide are moved around inside of a cell by diffusion. So, and things can also go in and out of the cell by diffusion as well through the cell membrane. There's also osmosis. This is the diffusion of water through a selectively permeable membrane. This again is also passive transport, and it moves water from an area of higher concentration of water to an area of lower concentration of water. Osmosis causes cells to shrink when put in salt water. That's why if you eat a lot of salt, you'll feel thirsty because your throat cells and your mouth cells will say, "Oh, we just had a lot of salt, we're shrinking, give us some water." Okay. This is also why plants will wilt if you give them salt water, why plants die alongside of the road where at the end of winter where they have put a lot of salt, um, because the cells shrink and cannot hold enough water. Osmosis also causes cells to expand when put in fresh water. This is why freshwater fish and saltwater fish actually can't go back and forth between the two types of waters, because if you take a saltwater fish and put it in fresh water, it will kill it because its cells are designed for saltwater. Okay, and vice versa. If you take a freshwater fish and put it in the ocean, it will lose too much water and it will die because it is designed, God designed it for its particular environment. Then there is also active transport. This requires energy expenditure in the form of ATP by the cell. And an example of this is the sodium potassium pump. It uses proteins to move sodium and potassium across the cell membrane. What happens is that there is actually more sodium and potassium inside the cell than there is outside. So it wants to move outside of the cell. But the cell needs sodium and potassium, so it pumps it back in. And then finally, this is not in your notes, and I apologize. So add this at the end. You have plenty of space to add this, so make sure you add this, please. A unicellular organism can never grow large because diffusion would not work across large distances in order to sustain a large single-celled organism. That's why all these single-celled organisms we will look at are under a microscope. They are microscopic because diffusion just is very inefficient for the transportation of materials. In larger organisms like ourselves, we have whole body systems for transporting materials. Our circulatory system, that is its job is to transport materials throughout us. If we had to rely upon diffusion of oxygen and other materials, um, it just would not work. So, single celled organisms have to remain very small. So, our objectives for today's video were to describe the processes of diffusion and osmosis, summarize how cells depend on diffusion and osmosis, and determine why cells must be small in order to sustain life. So, remember to keep watching this video to answer the questions, and don't forget your 5 questions in your margin. And I will be back with one more video from this chapter.